Welcome to the Real View podcast, where Ohio Realtors connect you to innovators and influencers, keeping you with the real view of real estate. Whether you're a broker, agent, first-time homebuyer, industry leader, or just happen to stumble upon our podcast today, you can expect to hear tips, tools, tricks, interesting information, and so much more from the experts in Ohio's real estate game.
Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of The Real View. I'm Anastasia, the Manager of Advocacy and Research here at Ohio Realtors. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today's episode is an exciting one. We are talking about transparency, accountability, and how your tax dollars are being defended by one of Ohio's key public offices. Whether you're a real estate professional, local government official, or just someone interested in how our communities thrive, this conversation is going to give you insights you won't want to miss. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Dorinda Byers, the business development consultant from the Ohio Auditor of State's office. The Auditor's office plays a crucial role in auditing public entities, investigating fraud, and working with local governments to improve fiscal health. Thank you, Dorinda, for joining us today.
Thank you, Anastasia, for this wonderful opportunity to work with the Ohio Realtors and get the word out on our office. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start by giving our listeners a bit more background. Can you provide an overview of your role at the Ohio Auditor of State's office? What exactly are the duties of the auditor, and what kind of entities does your office audit?
Absolutely. Great question. Thank you for asking. So I am the business development consultant, as you mentioned. And what that means is I lead business development, marketing, and sales for various arms of the office, including the Ohio Performance Team, local government services, our Uniform Accounting Network, special investigations, training, and open government. So you can hear we have quite a few functions. Our primary function, Anastasia and listeners out there, is to audit about 5,900 public offices every year. That's our primary function. We have some others as well. We're one of 5 independently elected statewide offices. And so we are looking at that clean, accountable, transparent government. And those audits that we do of those 5,900 public offices could be anything ranging from a cemetery to a township to a library to a university. So we're really pretty broadly based. And then we also do some work in things like performance auditing, identifying and investigating fraud in public offices, providing financial services to local governments, and then finally, promoting transparency in government. Our auditor, Keith Faber, is a very big believer in transparency. So that's been a really big emphasis for us is open records, Anastasia, and making sure that people really understand what is going on in their government and have access to those records as well.
Wow, that's very helpful. And it's very important to understand the full scope of your office's work and just how many entities you're responsible for auditing. I didn't realize you were auditing like cemeteries. That's very neat, but very important. And I know your office has been successful in recovering millions in taxpayer money through audits and investigations. What are some of the most impactful recoveries you've been a part of, and how did these successes benefit Ohio's communities and taxpayers?
Well, Auditor Faber is a huge believer in trying to catch those who are lying, cheating, or stealing from the government. So we have had some recent high-profile cases. You and some of your listeners may be familiar with the Columbus Zoo. That's one of our more high-profile recent cases. We had a situation there, Anastasia, where a little over $2 million was stolen by a variety of zoo employees, using it for things like concert tickets, sporting events, limousine rides. So obviously, if money is being stolen from the zoo, we're not able to preserve that zoo legacy, and we're not able to have the zoo potentially available for the public because those dollars are being diverted elsewhere and spent illegally. We also released earlier this year, Anastasia, a big report about Medicaid. Medicaid is one of the largest line items in the state budget. A lot of people don't realize that. But our office identified that there were about 124,000 individuals who were dual enrolled in Medicaid. What does that mean, you might ask? Well, what that means is they're enrolled in Ohio and they're enrolled in another state, and they're only supposed to be enrolled in one state. So when we identified those 124,000 individuals, that has a potential impact to the Ohio budget of about $200 million. So it's really substantial when we have individuals who are dual enrolled in that program. And then finally, another example near and dear to my heart, because I live in Marietta, is the Athens Metropolitan Housing Authority. So believe it or not, a county like Athens, one of the poorest in the state, we had about $2.3 million stolen from that Metropolitan Housing Authority by that former executive director, using it for things like a swimming pool and personal vacations. So in a poor county like that, we have really bad impacts because individuals then maybe who are on that waiting list for services from the Metropolitan Housing Authority are not necessarily getting those services because those dollars are being diverted elsewhere. So those are just a few examples. Since Auditor Faber took office in 2019, we've had about 128 convictions of individuals, believe it or not, for various types of public fraud and abusing tax dollars in office. And those have had an impact of over $20 million to the state budget.
Wow, that's crazy. That's a lot. How big is the staff at the auditor's office?
Great question, Anastasia. We have about 800 individuals working at our office. The vast majority of those are financial auditors because that's the vast majority of our work. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a main office in Columbus, and then we have some regional offices all around the state. So we have staff kind of all over the state since we work all over the state.
Wow. And speaking of financial auditors, financial audits are a core function of your office. How do they help safeguard public dollars against waste and abuse, particularly in local communities?
Great question, Anastasia. I would say accountability is really key there. So what we're really looking at when we go out and do a financial audit is we are reviewing government accounting. We're looking at those accounting standards with a kind of an objective lens. We ourselves are peer reviewed, so we have certain accounting standards we have to follow. We're really looking at how transactions are recorded. Were they recorded properly when money was spent? And then also, was those dollars spent lawfully? So those are the two big areas we're looking at: recorded properly and recorded lawfully. We're also looking at how accurate and reliable their financial standards are, and were there proper internal controls in place. Often when we are out on an audit, we're finding that there weren't internal controls in place. What does that mean? Well, what that means is you might be the only person, Anastasia, who can sign off on spending some dollars. And that's where we sometimes find waste, fraud, and abuse, is when one individual maybe has that power and they're the only person that can sign off then on transactions. So we're really looking for those internal controls as well. And as I mentioned earlier, the auditor is a huge believer in catching those who are lying, stealing, and cheating from the government. So we're not looking to say gotcha when we're out there on a financial audit. In most cases, we're looking to help that government get better because a lot of our local elected officials are part-time officials. So this is something that they are doing part-time. That's why we provide some of that help and support in addition to financial audits to help them understand how to do their jobs better through some of the trainings that we do, for example.
And going back to some of the more unique cases, I'm just still thinking about them. How do you even know to go after these entities when they're doing something wrong? Like, is there like a tip line, or how do you go about investigating that? Because there's probably such a wide array of just things that are going on.
So just one very unique case that we had, and people can't believe it, but we actually had a fiscal officer in Benton County buy a wildebeest for his personal zoo with some public funds. So that's another example, just very unique. How do we find out about these things? Well, you kind of hit on it. Number one, we do have a tip line. So individuals can call us. We also have a way that those things can be reported online through a form that we have. So we have a variety of ways that those things can be reported. At any given time, we have a number of tips being investigated, potentially as many as 125. Not all of those tips actually pan out, though, as you can imagine. So we get a tip in, and we're actually looking at those tips and evaluating those with our special audit task force. They're taking a look at it and kind of determining, was there fraud here or not? If they think there was potential for fraud, we're going to go ahead and open up a special investigation, and we're going to start looking for potential criminal activity. If we think we find criminal activity, we're going to be working with prosecutors to press charges, and in some cases, even providing support to those prosecutors to actually prosecute that case if they feel that they need our help. But yes, we do get a lot of tips into our office, and we welcome those tips. Sometimes they are uncovered as well during an audit. We may be looking at something and see that, oh gosh, it looks like there could be a little problem over here. So sometimes we do also catch that fraudulent activity during the course of our normal routine audit work.
Gotcha. And you mentioned, the Special Investigations Unit handles these allegations of fraud and corruption, what are kind of some of the more recent trends in fraud or misuse of public funds that have been the most concerning to your office?
Cybersecurity lately has kind of risen to the forefront. We have seen, Anastasia, a number of what we call vendor redirects. And what that means is someone is emailing a government entity and pretending to be a vendor. So let's say it could be a paving company that your local government has worked with in the past. And that person is potentially emailing and saying, hey, I request payment from you. Click here on this link. Before we know it, we have dollars stolen because it's, again, what we call a vendor redirect because it is a legitimate vendor name that entity has worked with. However, the payment portal is not legitimate. So we have seen a number of those kinds of incidents. We've also seen some phishing kinds of incidents where someone will send something out and try to get control of government entities, computer systems, et cetera, through sending out those phishing schemes. So cybersecurity is certainly top of mind for us here very recently because we've unfortunately had some really high profile incidents lately affecting local government.
Yeah. And I heard about the incident in, I think it was the city of Columbus. There was some sort of cybersecurity breach, right? Recently.
Yes. There have been some breaches as well where there are just records involved. So I can think of a couple of those where records and data and information were stolen. And then we've also had others where perhaps that information will be held for a ransom, if you will. So there are a variety of different ways that a cyber criminal can potentially attack a local government. And that's why we're emphasizing a lot of the training. We have a dedicated site on our website and some dedicated cybersecurity training that we can offer to help local governments take a look at how they can better prevent and also the kinds of procedures, controls that they can put into place to try to help prevent cybersecurity fraud.
Right. Wow, that sounds like a lot of challenging work, but it has to be so rewarding when you can hold these individuals accountable for and recover money when there's money lost. What are some of the future goals of the Ohio Auditor of State's Office that might interest our listeners, particularly those related to community and economic development?
Wonderful question. So, Auditor Faber is really emphasizing how we get out there and help local governments to get better through performance audits, for example. So those are more like a consulting engagement. And we're really coming out and taking a look at how a government is performing today versus how a government might want to perform tomorrow. So obviously, when we are getting government operating better, that helps our local citizens because sometimes it may be an ability to provide services faster to citizens or better. Just one quick example, College Credit Plus, that's a program that a lot of our state citizens are interested in because a lot of youth are now taking college classes while they're in high school. We made some really good recommendations to improve that program, such as by consistent marketing and increasing some underserved student participation in that program. So that's an example where we were really trying to improve a program. Also, Anastasia, your listeners are very involved in real estate, obviously. That goes hand in hand with school districts and property taxes. A lot of our performance work that we do with our performance audits involves fiscally distressed school districts. So if a school district is in fiscal distress, we're really trying to help that school district right the ship, so to speak, and address those challenges. That also obviously affects economic development. If a school system isn't performing well, then potentially businesses are going to look at that and say, oh gosh, I'm not sure I want to locate here because of this particular school district. So we're really trying to help enhance that school district performance as well through those performance audits. And then finally, I would say we are auditing on a daily basis economic development kinds of entities like joint economic development districts, CICs, economic development councils, to make sure that they are performing their work successfully on behalf of communities. And again, obviously that affects the real estate market. So those are a few examples. Finally, I would say we have the Senate Bill 91, and that is a huge new bill that's requiring some training on fraud for local government officials. So government officials will be completing that so they better understand how to recognize, address, and report fraud. So that's another huge emphasis for the auditor right now. Auditor Faber worked very hard to get that legislation through and is now really trying to make sure that governments are properly trained on that. So hopefully we can prevent some of these cases we talked about, like with the wildebeest or the zoo or the Athens Metropolitan Housing Authority.
Yeah, I mean, it all starts with education and kind of knowing what you're getting into and knowing the rules. So, oh my gosh, that's so important. Well, Dorinda, thank you so much for joining us today and for the incredible work that your office does to protect taxpayer dollars and strengthen our communities. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning into this episode. If you'd like to learn more about the Ohio Auditor of State's office and stay updated on their latest initiatives, visit ohioauditor.gov. Is that correct, Dorinda?
That is correct. And we have a newsletter that you can sign up for there as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. And until next time, thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Real View.
Thank you for listening to The Real View. That wraps up today's episode. You can keep up with the latest on the podcast at ohiorealtors.org/therealview and on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Have questions, comments, or suggestions? We want to hear from you. Email us at podcast@ohiorealtors.org. We'll see you next time.